Hello, good morning and welcome to the session. I hope you're all keeping well and safe. The aim of this morning's session is to have a look at Chapter 8, the European Union Law. And after watching this video, I've set 20 questions for you to answer. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I've already sent you the slides on Microsoft Teams. If you haven't difficulty accessing them, then please let me know and I can send you copies from my email. Right, so just going through the slides and formation of the European Union, just to quickly mention that the founding members of the European Union, which was established after the Second World War, were Belgium and Italy, France, Germany, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands as well. They were the founding members of the European Union. On the 1st of January 1973, the United Kingdom joined the European Union. As it was then, it was actually called the European Economic Community, the EEC. That changed to what we now know to be the European Union. We voted to leave on the 23rd of June 2016, and at the moment there are 28 members, but as we know, we've left now, so there are 27. So you have to forgive me because notification has popped up on the screen, but that's gone now. Right, okay. So the next slide is to do with institutions of the European Union. Now, the original treaty that established the European Union was the Treaty of Rome, but now in 2009 we have the Treaty of Lisbon, which is similar to an Act of Parliament that establishes how the European Union should be run. Right, so there are two main treaties under the Treaty of Lisbon, and they sound a bit the same, but they are two different treaties. The first one is called the Treaty of the European Union, and the second one is called the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. So two different treaties that restructured the European Union as we know it now. Next slide is to do with the main institutions or organizations or bodies of the European Union. The first one is called the Council of Europe. We'll have a look at that and see what their function is. The second one is the Commission, the third one the European Parliament, and the final one is the Court of Justice of the European Union, which used to be called the European Court of Justice. So they're the main institutions of the European Union, and we'll have a look at them and see what role they play in Europe in general. Right, so start off with the Council of the European Union. Normally a representative is sent from every member state. Usually the Foreign Secretary is the one who's sent from the United Kingdom, but having said that, there are times when anybody who has a specialism in a particular area of government will be sent to be a member of the European Council. Meetings are held twice a year, so this is all historical stuff, so you can just go to the slides and read the text as well to help you. Member states take it in turns to provide the president. They normally have a 6-month tenure, so you can have a quick look on the internet to identify who the current president of the council is. So what does the council do? Surprisingly, most of us would naturally think that the council has a completely different function in terms of what it does in Europe, but it's actually the main or the principal law-making body in Europe. So if anybody says to you what institution of the European Union is responsible for making laws, then it is the Council of Europe. Right, how does the Council of Europe vote? Very important, it's something called double majority. Double majority, you'll read this in your textbook, simply refers to where there are two criteria used to identify when a decision is made by the Council. The first one is the requirement that 55% of member states vote in agreement. So any decision that is taken, the first criteria is that 55% of members of the EU must vote in favour. What that means is you need to work out what 55% of 27 members is, and that will give you roughly the number of countries that need to agree out of the 27. So I'll leave that to the mathematicians to work that one out. The second point is to do with 65% of the individual populations of the EU member states. So that means that we currently have 27 EU members. Now you've got to work out if each country has 100 people in it, just for argument's sake, then it's going to be 100 times 27, and then you need to work out 65% of that figure, and that will give you what we call double majority. So the two criteria you've got to remember for that one. Right, move on. 28, we moved on now from the council, so don't forget the council are the principal lawmaking body. The next institution is the commission. Now the function of the commission, well, if we start off with the fact that there are 28 commissioners, each one has responsibility for a particular area. So you might have a commissioner who's in charge of agriculture or the environment and so on and so forth. So the commissioners have specific expertise, and they mainly deal with different policies of the European Union. Each commissioner has a 5-year tenure as opposed to the president of the council, who's in post for 6 months. So the commissioners, there are 28 commissioners altogether, there'll be 27 now, and their main function is they have expertise in particular areas of the European Union. So what does the Commission do? It's on the slide. They propose new laws to the Council. That's the first role. So one role of the Commission is to propose new laws. The second role is they actual guardians of the treaties, and this simply means that they make sure that member states adhere to any EU laws or any regulations or directives. They are also, in addition to that, so this is the third function, excuse me, they are also responsible for the budget of the European Union. So they're the functions of the Commission. The European Parliament, who you might think are the actual lawmaking body, don't confuse that. It's the Council who have responsibility for making laws. European Parliament members are elected by member states. Every 5 years. There's roughly 751 MEPs. These are just figures that you might want to be aware of. In addition to that, it's worth knowing that MEPs, when they sit in Europe, don't actually sit as countries. So you don't have all UK MEPs sitting in Parliament in Europe, but they actually form political allegiances with other MEPs who have similar beliefs to their own political parties. So instead of forming national little groups, it's actually based on political ideology and so on, and political ideologies and beliefs. Right. It says that decisions are made by Parliament Council members, so that's one thing to bear in mind. What does the European Parliament do? Their main function is to decide on international agreements. They also decide on the admission of new members. They review the Commission's work and they ask the Commission to propose legislation. So these are all just factual issues that you can have a look at the textbook. But so long as you can at least remember one or two functions of the different institutions, that should come in handy should you get a question on what the functions of the institutions of the European Union are. Quite an important institution now we move on to is it used to be called the European Court of Justice. It's now called the Court of Justice of the European Union. Article 19 of the Treaty of the European Union sets out their function. So have a look at that in a textbook. They normally sit in Luxembourg, 28 judges, 11 of them sit in full court. But do have a quick look in the textbook at Article 19, which clearly sets out that they're responsible for interpreting and applying EU law. So Section 19 gives them that function. Right, but what's their main duty as the Court of Justice of the European Union? They mainly deal with what we call Article 267 references. So that simply means that if a national court is dealing with a case and they can't quite come to a decision, or they need clarification on any matters regarding EU law, then they may send that case to the Court of Justice of the European Union for advice. The Court of Justice of the European Union will then give a preliminary ruling that is passed back to the national court, and then the national court may then apply the ruling to the case that they're dealing with. So that's a key function of the Court of Justice of the European Union under Article 267 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. Right, there's a case on tachographs that deals with that particular point, so have a look in the textbook and read the case on the case that deals with tachographs. Right, so let's move on to one case that you might have a look at, and that's the case of Van Duyn and Home Office in 1974 to do with free movement of individuals, and a Dutch national wanted to work in the United Kingdom for the Church of Scientology, and there was a bit of confusion as to whether she could do that or not, and the courts confirmed that the right she had applied to her being able to work in this country. So the first case where the European Court, as it was then, had to make a ruling was the case of Van Duyn. Right, I'm going to quickly whiz through this now because I don't want it to be longer than 15 minutes. Right, operation of the Court of Justice of the European Union is merely paper-based, so there's no real verbal evidence given in court. The national language of the European Court of Justice is French. They have somebody called the Advocate General, who's a fully qualified lawyer, who deals with the issues involving a case. They identify independently and without partiality the key issues of the case, and then present paper or written evidence to the Court of Justice of the European Union, and then a decision is made based on that. Key thing to remember is that the Court of Justice of the European Union is not bound by its previous decisions. We'll learn about precedents later on. And also, in terms of statutory interpretation, the favoured approach is what we call the purposive approach. Again, something we will look at later on to refresh our memories. Right, sources of EU law, the key source, the primary source are treaties, but also they have secondary sources, and again there's a repetition of treaties. So you have treaties, you have regulations, and then you have directives, and they all are very similar. They require member states to reflect European laws in member states through the national legislature. Right, so typical example of treaties, read the case of McCarthy's and Smith, very important case to do with equal pay, where Wendy Smith was entitled to rely on EU law to make sure that she got paid the same as a male comparator, provided she could show that she was doing like work or work of equal value or work rated as the equivalent. So important case, do read that in the textbooks. Regulations, again, are issued by the European Union, and they have what we call direct effect in member states. So the words direct effect simply refer to the fact that once a regulation is issued by the European Union, then whether it's implemented in the member state or not, it has a direct effect, and individuals may rely on such regulations in a court of law. Okay, directives slightly different. If a directive is issued, then national member states rather are required to reflect those laws in member states. Right, so how are directives changed into national laws by member states? There are three different ways. The first way is through a statutory instrument. The second method is through an Act of Parliament, and the third example is through orders in council. So again, refer to the textbooks and it will give you typical examples of when directives have been reflected in national laws, either through an Act of Parliament, statutory instrument, or orders in council. Direct effect and what we call direct vertical effect. This is important and you must try and understand it. All it means is that if the European Union have issued a directive that, for example, protects consumer rights, if member states, for example, the United Kingdom, have not implemented that directive, then individuals may still rely on the directive, even though it's not part of UK law. Because don't forget, the idea of a directive is that once it's issued, then member states must then reflect those directives in their national laws. If that's not done, still an individual is able to claim based on that directive. Horizontal direct effect, and again this relates to directives, slightly different, and what that means is that normally if a directive is not reflected in national laws, the individual may not be able to bring a case against another individual. So the key thing to remember is that with vertical direct effect, if a directive is not reflected in national laws, then an individual may bring a case against the state. That's the difference here. So with vertical direct effect, it's an individual bringing a case against the state, even though the directive hasn't been enacted as part of national laws. For horizontal direct effect, it's where the individual is bringing a case against another individual, but again, the directive has not been reflected in national laws. Now, in order to get round that, there's a case called Frankovic and Italian Republic in 1991 that does allow for where an individual has suffered loss, for that individual to bring a claim against the state. So in a way, it sort of alleviates the negative effects of horizontal direct effect. Right, the next slide, you've got impact of EU law. There are some cases there, you can have a look at those. So Van Gen and Loos, you've got Costa and Inel and Factor Tame are all cases that you might want to have a quick look at. And finally, what's the effect of EU law as it was then before Brexit on the sovereignty of Parliament? And don't forget, sovereignty of Parliament simply means that Parliament is the supreme lawmaking body of the United Kingdom. In 1973, when we joined the European Union, we did relinquish some of that power. So technically speaking, once we were part of the European Union, then parliamentary sovereignty was watered down a little bit. And I know I've rambled through this very quickly, but it's a summary of Chapter 8 on the European Union. I hope you are able to go through the text and understand it and apply your knowledge to the 20 questions that I have set. Right, any questions, don't forget you can email me or contact me via Microsoft Teams. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. All the best, and don't forget, keep safe. Thank you.